Hi, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome. I'm going to give it a couple of more minutes just to see if some other folks drop in or not. If you'd like to, in the meantime, put your name and your organization in the chat, and we'll get started soon. Thanks for joining us. Also, can someone confirm if they can see my presentation?
I can
Yes,
see the presentation.
Thank you.
it looks great.
Thank you. All right, it looks like we are holding steady right around 35 people, so I will go ahead and kick things off. Oh gosh, I don't want, sorry, things are sharing on the screen I'm sharing. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the General Information and Training Session for the 2025 Homeownership Development Notice of Funding Availability. I'm Jessica McKinnon. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Senior Homeownership Development Program Analyst here at OHCS. And before we really kick everything off, I wanted to get a quick sense of who's in the room today. So could you raise your virtual hand if you have not received homeownership funding from us before? Oh, that's great. That's a lot of people. I'm excited. All right. And then is there anyone here who is thinking of applying for the first time? So if you have applied before, put your hand down. Ah, that's super exciting. I'm so glad to see so many new faces in the crowd. All right. Well, welcome to everyone, especially welcome to everyone who's new. Hopefully I have worthwhile information to share with you today. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. This meeting will be recorded and posted on the website afterward for your convenience during the NOFA process. We do ask that everyone stay on mute while others are speaking, but feel free to enter questions into the chat at any time. We'll pause for a handful of question and answer breaks during the presentation. If you'd rather ask your question out loud, please wait for those breaks and then raise your hand to speak. We scheduled 2 hours for this meeting to allow for plenty of time for questions, but we do also have a lot to cover. We'll start off with some quick introductions and a brief introduction to the NOFA timeline and funding sources. Then we'll dive further into those two sources and their requirements. After that, we'll talk through the details about the NOFA process, where we'll get a little into the weeds on how things are done. And then if there's time at the end, I have a question that I hope can spur some conversation amongst yourselves. If you're a veteran of the LIFT program or attended our engagement sessions this fall, you'll find a lot of this content familiar, but I do hope that this training is still worthwhile for you as well. And if you haven't worked with us before, this is our homeownership development team. For the sake of time, I won't have everyone introduce themselves, but really quickly, Talia Concravis is our Assistant Director of Homeownership Programs and manages the homeownership development team. I'm the program analyst for LIFT and other homeownership development direct funding programs. So I manage this NOFA process and will be your main contact through application approval. Tasha Worth is our program analyst in charge of tax credits and manages OAHTC. If you're applying for OAHTC, you'll be working with her on that part of the application and I think through the whole OAHTC process. Elizabeth Thomas and Susie Sandstrom are our development officers. They'll take over any projects that have been awarded and walk you through underwriting, construction, and ongoing compliance. And I'm so sorry, very suddenly, the yard people are here to work right outside my window. So let me know if you have any trouble hearing me over them. All right, so this is the timeline for this year's NOFA. We published everything on January 6th, and we have this training session and 2 more planned for this month. We're currently accepting pre-applications, and those will be available until shortly before the close of the NOFA. We'll begin accepting full applications on February 24th. Since this is a first come, first served application process, we wanted to give everyone plenty of time to put together a quality application and not feel rushed to get it in as quickly as possible. We're going to accept and recommend applications in 2 batches or cohorts. I'll go into more detail on that later in the presentation, but the deadline to be considered with the first cohort is March 10th, and the deadline of the second cohort and the close of the NOFA will be May 12th. Our plan is to get the first cohort's awards approved and issued in May and our second cohort in July, but this timeline here allows for a little bit of wiggle room depending on how many applications we receive. This year's NOFA will operate a lot like last year's. The awards will be issued on a first come, first served basis, and all applications will be required to meet the standards. So rather than applications competing against one another for higher scores, you just need to meet a certain minimum. And I'll go into this a little more today, but really dig in the next training session later this week. And are there any questions about the timeline or like really big picture before I move forward and really dig in?
Jessica, I do see 2 hands up. I'm not sure if these are hands from your poll earlier, or so maybe any one of these 2 hands would like to just speak out. Root means, do you still have a question? Root means squared. Oh, okay. I think we're ready to go.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Susie. All right, so let's see. So this NOFA includes 2 different funding sources, LIFT and OAHTC. We have a little more than $40 million in LIFT available, offered as a loan that is satisfied by the affordability period. It's available to eligible covenant holders using a shared equity model. We're also offering OAHTC for the first time for homeownership development. It's a tax credit that reduces interest rates on permanent loans. There's not a lot of use for this in homeownership development, but it is available to eligible limited equity co-ops and manufactured home parks. And I'm going to dig into these programs a little more. I think most, if not all of you, will be applying for LIFT, so I'm going to spend a lot more time here than I will with OAHTC. So what is LIFT? This is a program that uses Article 11Q capital bonds to fund affordable housing development. If you're not familiar with capital bonds, these are funds that are meant to support things like roads and bridges and the Capitol building and other things that the state would own or operate. But housing can actually fit that requirement as well. LIFT supports both rental and homeownership programs, of course. This offering is only for the homeownership side. It's our most consistent and available funding for homeownership development. We're grateful that we've received funds to support this program every year since it was approved for homeownership, but we do recognize that it's not very flexible and can be a little challenging to navigate. So we're working on making things a bit more accessible and are always happy to answer questions if anything is unclear. I used the term eligible covenant holder earlier. This is something that's defined in statute and represents the types of entities that can enforce a state affordability covenant. Since we use affordability covenants, all LIFT recipients have to be an eligible covenant holder. The slide includes the definition from statute, but in fewer words, it includes public and government agencies, nonprofit organizations, both regular and manufactured home park co-ops, and federally recognized Indian tribes. Please note that it does not include individuals, for-profit corporations, or partnership LLCs. So if you intend to apply as any of those, you would not be eligible for LIFT. To be eligible for LIFT, your development also needs to meet some requirements. Projects that are eligible for this program are new construction of affordable housing units, conversion of non-housing structures into new affordable homes, and new manufactured home parks that include the units, so not just the site. Any project eligible for LIFT also needs to use a shared equity model where an eligible covenant holder maintains ownership of the land and the homeowner takes ownership of the structure or the unit itself. This is most commonly a community land trust, but could also be a co-op, manufactured home park, leasehold condo, or something similar. If you're not a community land trust, it's also possible if you want to partner with a CLT to take ownership of the land once your project is built. All units funded with LIFT need to be below 80% AMI. LIFT funds can only be spent on capitalized construction costs, so expenses necessary to place the project in service. You will need another source of funds to cover any costs that LIFT can't. Projects must not have begun vertical construction, but you can start site work at your own risk. And then because of the legal requirements of the bonds, we cannot use this program to fund projects on sovereign or tribal lands. And as we go through this NOFA, you'll see reference to some additional special eligibility criteria that we'll commonly call RESCs. That stands for Rural, Emerging, Small, and Culturally Specific. Applicants who meet these definitions may be eligible for certain benefits that are meant to keep the program accessible and equitable, like set-asides, additional funds, or adjusted scoring requirements. I recommend that for all of these, you review the full definition written in the NOFA before deciding whether or not they apply to you. But for the quick explanation of each is that we have a general definition of rural at OHCS that is a little complicated, so we have an interactive map to help you define or to help you determine that. Rural is determined for each project, not each developer, and then the other three are based on developer. Emerging developers are those who are new to our program and have built fewer than 5 homes using LIFT or HDIP funding. Small developers are those with fewer than 5 paid staff members dedicated to development, management, and compliance, and who build no more than 6 homes per year. To qualify for benefits as an emerging or small developer, you need to be applying for developments that are 15 or fewer homes. And that's not to say that if you're a smaller emerging developer that you can't apply for more than 15 homes, you just won't be eligible for those extra benefits. And then the last but not least category is culturally specific organizations, which is an organization that specifically serves a certain cultural community that is underserved in housing. OHCS has actually done a lot of work this year to redefine culturally specific organizations, so please make sure that you refer to the definition in the NOFA. All right. And there is one other special category that we use in this NOFA, which is counties underserved by LIFT. This is any county in Oregon that has received funding to build 20 or fewer homes. There's a list of which counties are eligible here on the slide and the definition section of the NOFA as well. This category is project specific, and our goal is to achieve better geographic diversity in our program. You can see from the map that we don't have a great history of serving Eastern or coastal Oregon, and we hope that we can start improving on that this year. The first and largest item that those special categories will impact are our lift set-asides, which is how we sort of direct funding for this program. So we're releasing a total of around 40 million in lift funding. Half of that, or a little over 20 million, will be available to everyone right away. About 8 million will be specifically set aside for small and emerging developers. And the goal of this set aside is to support capacity building in smaller and newer developers, and also to ensure that there's some space where they are not competing with the larger, more experienced lift partners. The remaining 12 million is set aside for culturally specific organizations and counties underserved by lift. And this should allow for a few substantial projects that specifically target underrepresented communities. These are soft set-asides, meaning that when the NOFA is completed, any unused funds will be released to the rest of the applicants, and we'll award those on a first-come, first-served basis as well. Of course, there's a question of what happens if someone is eligible for both categories, or what happens if one of the set-asides runs out of funds. Anyone eligible for a set-aside is also eligible for any other category that they're eligible for. So for example, a small developer wants to apply, but the small and emerging set-aside has been completely spent. That developer could still apply and receive funds from that general pool available to all applicants. Another more complicated example is an emerging developer may also be building in a county underserved by lift. They're eligible for both set-asides. In this case, OHCS would make the determination of which category funds were drawn from based on the other applications received. Our goal, of course, would be to serve the most people possible.
Jessica, can I read a question that's popped up in the chat?
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, it says, did the underserved map list of counties indicate the ones that are eligible as underserved?
Yes, it did. So this list here is everything that we consider underserved. Was that all, Susie?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you. All right. Then moving on to the good part, this slide shows what you may be eligible for. We have adjusted the way that LIFT works from the way it did in the past. We're now able to award funding on a per unit basis based on the number of bedrooms in each home. The table shows the exact amounts, but you can see that a studio unit is eligible for up to $165,000. And then the maximum award increases as the number of bedrooms goes up. Any additional bedrooms after 4 will be valued at $20,000 each. Rural applicants will be eligible for a small increase in funds, so $5,000 per unit up to $100,000 total. So for instance, if a rural developer was building 1 2-bedroom unit, they would be eligible for $190,000 instead of $185,000. Please note that this number is the maximum that you can receive. There's a larger determination process that I'll get into on the next slide. Also, please note that the maximum award per project is $8 million. If you need more than that for a larger development, we recommend that you break the project into phases and apply for only the first phase this year, just due to the limited resources that we currently have available. How we'll actually determine the award will be based on your performa, which is a whole separate training that I'll do next week. We'll do a thorough review of your performa. You'll need to have at least one source of funds in addition to LIFT and your sales proceeds to cover particularly year 1 expenses. This can be a construction loan or owner equity or whatever makes sense for your organization. Your LIFT award will essentially fill the gap up to that maximum allowable amount on the table and up to a 10% profit and developer fee. There's some checks and balances to this program, so when you finish the project, you'll need to submit a final pro forma showing all of your expenses and actual sales proceeds. If you do earn more than 10% profit because you raised your sales prices or cut your expenses, you will be asked to return some of those funds. We recommend lowering your sales prices if your expenses are lower than planned. Since these awards are based on the bedroom count of your units, you do need to notify us in advance if the plan changes, and we will need to adjust your award. Please do not apply for 3-bedroom homes and then change them all to 1-bedroom homes a little after the award. If you already have a lift loan with us, it is a requirement to notice us if your bedroom counts change, but this is an added level going into this next NOFA. And finally, while we're no longer requiring an appraisal at application, we will collect one prior to closing. If you're using a construction loan, the combined value of the lift and construction loans can't exceed the estimated value for the completed project. So this should be a standard appraisal that you would do for your construction lenders that would estimate the market value of the properties, including the homes. And then changing topics just a little bit. I mentioned at the start that LIFT is a loan satisfiable by an extended affordability period. This slide covers all of those details. So we do require a first position lien. We'll share that first position with a construction lender subject to an intercreditor agreement. The way it all works is that when we close on the loan, we'll file an operating agreement with affordability and other roles and responsibilities. And then we'll file a lien on the land and a lien on the future improvements or structures. When the homes are sold, we will remove the lien on the improvements and keep the operating agreement and lien on the land. The first affordability period is 20 years. So after 20 years, you can pay back the loan in full, or you can sign another operating agreement extending the affordability period, roles, and responsibilities for another 20-year term, so a total of 40 years. At that point, the loan is considered satisfied and we release the lien on the land. And that is everything for LIFT. So I'll go ahead and pause here to see if there's any questions on anything that I've covered so far.
There's nothing in the chat thus far, so I guess people can use that function and just speak out.
I hope that the fact that there's no questions means that I have just done a really good job of explaining everything.
Oh, yes, you are, Jessica, but we did just have a question pop up. Can you give an example of underwriting using Lyft? And then there is a second question after that. So an example of underwriting using Lyft.
Sure. Actually, Susie, do you want to talk about underwriting using Lyft?
I most certainly do. So for the underwriting process, that at that point you'll be working with either me or Elizabeth, and we will have, and you can see in the NOFA as well, but when we send you a reservation letter, we'll just have a list of things that you need to accomplish before we can close on the loan. Oftentimes that's making sure that all your funding sources are committed. We would close with any lenders, we would try and close at the same time if that's, talk to your anybody who wants to have a lien on your property or on the development will need to be in communication with them. But and it works just like a regular escrow. You will contact an escrow officer, we'll have an escrow number, we'll go through document exchange with you and your counsel, and then just close like a regular escrow where you will go in and sign the documents and then have them recorded. I hope that's enough for what we're doing today. And then there was a second second question here. Jessica says, can you talk about the appraisal for the loan plus lift? When does this need to be sent to OHCS?
Sure. So the appraisal, we are moving, so this is a little new to us too. We're moving to an appraisal that would be typical of what you'd provide a construction lender. So we'd want to see an estimation of the final value of your project after all of the structures have been built, like what the overall market value would be. I think the additional requirements we have on the appraisal are that um, we need to be listed as a user of the appraisal. So you need to list OHCS on there or have the appraiser write that in that we can use the appraisal. And then it needs to consider any additional affordability requirements other than lift. So if you got like a grant or another funding source from your local jurisdiction that required you to have a lower AMI, then it would need to consider that restriction as well. You'll need it during the underwriting process, so at some point before you close on the project, but we don't need it in advance of your application, so it's okay if you don't have it right now.
Thanks, Jessica. A couple more questions here. Next one in the chat is, what are the payment terms for the loan?
So the payment terms for the loan are hopefully we never take any payments because we hope that in that 20 years you will extend your operating agreement and um, then that'll ultimately satisfy the loan and you won't owe anything back. Um, if you choose to repay it, I might need to double check some things, but I'm pretty sure it's a 0% interest loan. So I'll double check that and issue a correction if I am wrong.
Yeah, I'm also pretty sure it's 0% interest.
Thank you, Talia. There is, so I guess going into the weeds of the legal documents, there is allowance for pro rata foreclosure in the case that, say, one of your home buyers, their bank forecloses on the home buyer. We have the ability to forgive or get rid of the affordability restrictions on that one property so that the bank can take possession of the house and do what the bank does. And then we would require you to pay back that individual portion from probably sales proceeds to pay back that piece of the loan for that one unit. So we wouldn't foreclose on your whole project if one person, one of your home buyers was foreclosed on by their bank. Hopefully that answers that whole question.
Jessica, just one more here in the chat. Otherwise, for others that are following along in the chat, some questions have been answered directly in there. But here's one I will read out. When you say underwriting the project, do you mean to close lift funds or to close the homes? And I think that means we're closing the lift funds, right? Yeah.
Yeah, for us, our underwriting is closing on the lift loan. When you eventually close on your homes, some point down the road, we require just a couple of things like an income verification form and like who is your home buyer demographics form. But otherwise, we'd stay out of the bank and the underwriting of your home buyer.
So as a follow-up to that, they just want to confirm that you want the appraiser to appraise based on plans and pro forma.
Yes.
And then I think, Jackie, do you want to follow this question up? Looks like you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I just want to be clear on the change. So generally, prior the state was looking for appraisals based on land value and the horizontal infrastructure improvements. Now you would like us to, in addition to that, to add in based on plans and pro forma, which can significantly change due to construction cost changes or the market. You want us to appraise hypothetical pro formas and plans. So we include the vertical cost. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, we definitely include the vertical plans with this new method.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions in the chat, Susie?
Okay, one more. Here we go. What is the home buyer profile, income restrictions, and that whole? How do you determine sale price?
Sorry, Susie, you cut off a little in the middle there. Can you
sorry.
repeat it?
Yeah, I'll go one at a time. So what is the home buyer profile? So I think we're looking at home buyer eligibility here. And then the follow-up to that is, how do you determine sale price?
Okay. Yeah, so the home buyer profile for us, the only requirement is that they need to be 80% AMI or lower. And that varies from county to county. There's some resources. I don't have anything on the slide, but if you reach out to me, I can find some resources to give you to identify that AMI requirement. How do you determine sales price is we typically leave the sales price determination up to our partners, understanding that you all have lots of different resources available to you. So we expect whatever mortgage the buyer takes out to be affordable to them at their income level. But we also understand that there could be a lot of down payment assistance and um, individual savings accounts and IDAs and things that can help a home buyer purchase their home. So really, we just want to see a sales price that is in general affordable to that 80% AMI level. I think we're working on a resource to help kind of point that out based on your county and the AMI levels, what feels like a reasonable sales price. We have been using that kind of on the back end just to make sure that whatever sales prices are presented to us don't like feel crazy wild and aren't too out there for us. But we do recognize that things vary from place to place and person to person. Hopefully my non-answer is good enough answer. Anything else,
maybe,
Susie?
Yeah, I think we're good to move ahead. I just do want to clarify some things that have come up that, the appraisal is due before you close on the LIF loan. It's no longer due at application.
Yes.
And then I don't know, anyway, one more here just popped up. It says 10% for the developer. Is there restriction on contractor fees, and how are draws on the loan?
So there are restrictions on the contractor fees. I don't have that number right in front of me. I think it's 14% for any contractor. And then if the contractor has an identity of interest, so like if you're your own contractor or your contractor is also a member of your board, that would be a 10% maximum fee. What was the other half of the question, Susie?
How are draws done on the loan?
Okay, draws are, gosh, Susie, maybe you have a better way of wording this for me.
Sure, I give it a go. So once you are ready to close the loan, it is possible that you could draw on some funds, maybe to pay for land acquisition loan or other eligible expenses. But once you get to Elizabeth and I, when you're preparing to close the loan, we'll go over the draw request and provide all sorts of information on that. But essentially, you're just going to submit invoices that are eligible costs. You'll submit them to us with the invoice itself, fill out a draw request form, and then you can just pull on your funds, and then funds are dispersed to you, within 7 to 10 days of your request. You have to have closed on the LIF loan. Documents need to be recorded, and the person who gets the funds has to be the borrower on the LIF loan. But yeah, and it says, can this be used for modular? Okay, anyway, that was answered.
Yes, for anyone just listening to the recording, yes, the funds can be used for modular homes. All right, are we good to move forward?
There are some questions still.
Jessica, I would recommend that you keep moving forward and we'll circle back to these questions in the chat.
Okay.
These are
No, that
great
works for
questions.
me.
Keep them coming.
We have set aside like a whole hour to answer questions. So if they don't get answered, you can hold them for later. And if there's more time, there should still be time at the end of the presentation. Okay. So thanks everyone for very thoughtful questions. I really appreciate the engagement and the interest in the program. So I'll go ahead and move us on to OAHTC. This is a pretty short section because I don't really think most of you will be applying for that. And we've done some one-on-one work with those who we do know are going to apply for this. So OAHTC is the Oregon Affordable Housing Tax Credit Program. This program provides tax credits to lenders who offer permanent loans to affordable housing projects in exchange for lower interest rates. Permanent loans aren't typical of homeownership projects since they're sold and you get the income from that. But they are really common in rental projects. And this is really only relevant to some of those housing types that are part of the spectrum between rental and homeownership that are closer to the rental side, like co-ops and manufactured home parks. In 2023, the program was expanded to include specifically limited equity co-ops, and $2.5 million was set aside for homeownership NOFA. What this $2.5 million means for the program, that can support tax credits for up to $65 million in permanent loans based on a 30-year amortization schedule and assuming a 4% interest rate. The actual interest rate reduction will be determined by your permanent lender, but they can reduce the rate by up to 4%. This is a very limited offering in this NOFA and is available to only two types of developments. The first is limited equity co-ops, or LECs. LECs can apply for both LIFT and OAHTC at the same time, or may apply for just OAHTC through this NOFA. There are pass-through requirements, so if you're applying for LIFT or have another source of funding with income restrictions, you'll need to demonstrate in your cash flow that you're bringing the rent below 80% AMI or the relevant income restriction. If you don't have another source of funds, you'll need to just demonstrate 80% AMI. OAHTC for manufactured home parks has been allowed for a while. This offering is mainly a convenience for manufactured home parks that are also applying for LIFT, so that you only need to submit one application. If you're a manufactured home park only looking for OAHTC and not applying for LIFT, you should apply through the ORCA and not through this NOFA. There is not a pass-through requirement for manufactured home parks, so your AMI restrictions would just be the same as LIFTs. Application requirements are hopefully not too substantial. If you're applying for LIFT, you'll follow the same process that I'll go into in the next section of this presentation. The only difference is that you'll have a supplemental OAHTC application that will include your cash flow, any pass-through requirements, and other OAHTC specific needs. And you'll need to submit just that letter of intent from your permanent lender. If you're applying for just OAHTC and you will have your own application, or you will have your own application and list of documents to submit, and you'll actually follow a much shorter process that's kind of separate from the LIFT application. If you're not going to apply for LIFT, you might not find a whole lot of the remainder of this presentation relevant for you, but you can work with us to make sure that everything's good to go for your application. And that's actually all I have for OAHTC. So I'll pause again, and Tasha is available, who manages our tax credit programs, if anyone has any questions. Anything in the chat, Susie? Should I just go ahead and move forward?
Yeah, I think there's one. We're trying to just flag ones we can come back to at the end, but let's see. This one question says, as a mobile home park, if it's a mobile home, wait. I think let us come back to this. I need to see how this is worded.
Okay.
Charlie has already answered the question, so you can go ahead and move on if you want, Jessica.
Oh, okay, you're right. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the team covering this for me. Too many screens open at once. Okay, then I'll go ahead and move on to the second half of our presentation today, which is going to dive into the NOFA process. And this slide essentially covers the whole process and also serves as an agenda for this section of the presentation. So starting at the top, we do expect that you'll have completed some important early project development tasks, and we'll verify this to make sure you're ready to proceed with LIFT in our timeline requirements. You'll submit a pre-application online, which will trigger us to create your Procorum work centers to submit your documents. Once you have that system set up, you'll use it to submit your application and all required documents. After your application has been submitted, we'll complete a preliminary review. Once your application has passed that, we complete scoring for that minimum threshold. We'll follow that with our recommendations to fund and then the official reservation letters and notice of award. And that early project development is important to us to ensure that your project can meet our required timelines. By the time you apply for LIFT, we will want you to have site control for at least 12 months following your application. We'll want your site to already be properly zoned or in the process of rezoning. We'll expect you to have already completed most of your site feasibility and impact studies and to have your preliminary site plan completed. We'll need construction estimates or some other evidence to substantiate the costs in your pro forma, and you'll need to have already identified your financing sources and received commitments, letters of interest, etc. You also need to have already determined your shared equity model and completed most of the groundwork. It's okay if you're a new community land trust, of course, but we do expect that you have already done your research, completed draft documents like your ground lease, and taken those first few steps to be ready to support homebuyers. You can begin site development if that works for you, understanding that the LIFT loan is not guaranteed, but another reminder that we cannot fund projects that have already begun vertical construction. And your first step for the actual NOFA is the pre-application. A link is available on our website, in the NOFA, and on the application. It's just a Smartsheet form. The pre-application shouldn't take you very long. It just has a handful of basic screening questions to make you meet those to make sure that you meet those big requirements. Then it includes some really base level project details, contact information, and some information on when and how likely you are to apply so that we can gear up for those applications. Please allow 5 business days for us to set up your Procorum Work Center. Do not submit your pre-application the day before a deadline and email us asking to rush to get things set up. We're not going to do that, so please make sure you submit your pre-application as early as possible. They're not binding, there's no charge or fee, and it's absolutely fine if you want to change your mind and don't submit. And we're going to change topics really, like it's not a huge change of topics, but this is another good place to pause for just a second to see if there's any questions about the project development requirement application.
There are some questions that Talia's responding to. They don't refer to the application section. They might be things that come on later along down the process.
All right, then I'll go ahead and keep going. All right. So once we receive your application, that will serve as our trigger to get you set up in Procorum, which is our application and document sharing tool. So I wanted to note a couple of distinctions here. The meat of the application is in an Excel document that we call the application workbook. This is where you'll fill in all of your project information, pro forma, all the narrative questions, and everything else. You'll upload that along with any other documents into Procorum. This year is a little different than previous years. We're going to be piloting something called the Partner Portal. So you'll actually have two different Procorum Work Centers set up. One will be named after your project, which is the Application Work Center, and then the other will be named after your organization, which will be the Partner Portal. The intent of this division is to have a space where you can submit documents that apply to all of your projects only once. So for example, we require you to upload your tax returns every year if you have a project with us. If you have 10 projects, you'll be uploading those tax returns 10 times, so once for each project. So the goal of the partner portal is so that moving forward, you'll only have to upload those kinds of documents just the one time. So we know this is new, and we know that it can be confusing to change things and change how everything works. So we've tried to mark everything very clearly, both in the application workbook and in Procorum itself. If you're applying for multiple projects this year, I think you'll immediately see the benefits, I hope, fingers crossed. But if you're only applying for one project, those benefits may not appear until a little way down the road. So now I'm actually going to hand things over to Susie again to give you a more thorough rundown of the work centers.
Great. Okay, thank you. So Jessica, if you go to the next slide, please. And some of you may have already received your invitation. So if you'd like to follow along at home or in the office, feel free. But this is just to reiterate just a little bit what Jessica said about Procorum is our platform, Procorum Work Centers. So this is where we will have document sharing, storage, and submission throughout the lifetime of your project. You'll have your own documents in there. We'll have our documents. It's a great hub for that. And also there's a task management feature. So this will help you track the documents that are required to submit for your application, as well as when you move into other phases of the development. This also notifies OHCS of when the tasks are complete, and particularly for your application, this will be important to get your timestamp, because as you know, we're doing a first come, first serve on that. So Jessica, next slide, please. So your Procorum Work Center, as I said, within 5 days of your pre-application being approved by Homeownership Development, you will get an invitation to the Procorum Work Center. Now, if you recall in your pre-application, you listed some people that you would like to be in the work center. So those are the folks who will be receiving an email invite. And you're going to get 2 invites. One is going to be to this application work center and the other to the partner portal. So we're going to say this over and over again. I recommend when you get that email to try and get into your work centers right away, because this is where the application is. You want this. And if you do have any issues getting into the work center, please email us right away at the email address you see on the screen. It's also been provided in the NOFA. So you will become very familiar with this logo here, Procorum. You will see it in your sleep sometimes. As Jessica mentioned, the one work center for the application is identified by the project name and this 4-digit number that we assign, and then the partner portal. So Jessica, let's go to the next screen, because that's just pretty much repeating what you said, and I'm sure they heard you. I am going to do a live demo and get into the work centers right now, but I do want you to know that the way these are set up are essentially the same. So again, for storing documents, downloading forms and templates, and submitting and uploading documents. But how do you know which forms go in which place? So we're going to refer to your application workbook tab. And at this point, I'm going to go live with my demo. Jessica, if you could give me sharing power, or maybe I can just do that on my own here.
I think you should just be able to take it. I did make you a presenter.
Okay, oops, and it is, but I am sharing the wrong screen. I want to share this window right here. Okay, you can all see these two work centers that have popped up? Yes? Jessica, can you see these work centers?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so as I mentioned, we're gonna just take a quick peek in the application work center first, because this is where you will find the application itself. So here you have your project name, your number, jump in the application here. This section for announcements, this is where you will find announcements. If there's anything NOFA related, an amendment or anything, you will find that in here. You will also be notified in other ways. It'll be posted on the website. You'll get an email. But again, since this is a great centralized hub for everything, we'll post them in here as well. Otherwise, let's see, application submission. This work center is super easy because everything you're going to upload is going in this file. But let's take a look and see where you can get to the documents you need. So you're just going to click on that blank forms and it will load very slowly. And you'll see the application. Click on that. I did that again. We're going back. Okay, so here are all the forms that you may need to download. Now, to download something, you just click on it. Easy peasy. But I'd like to just show you what I was talking about on your application. This is your application workbook. If you scroll, there's several tabs down here. Go all the way to the document checklist tab. And this is where you're going to know what you need and where it goes. So you've got your document name, some notes about it, where it is in the work center, and where to upload it. So we're gonna get live a little bit more here. So many fun things. All right, so for example, if you have these general documents here, you want to, so you're going to provide some of your own things, like your organizational documents, for example. You can see that we're not providing this for you because that's your own document. We don't have that. Ultimately, that will go in the partner portal. Hang tight. The application workbook, of course, it's checked here because you know that we are providing this document, and this is where you can find it in the Project Work Center. So when you go to upload a document, you're just going to come on back to where I showed you. You're going to upload your things. So you want to once you've finished doing your thing, signed it, whatever, to upload a file, all you do is click upload file, and you can drag or drop it in. Now over here, the status, the type, description, don't worry about that. We'll know what it is because of the naming conventions we give you. So no worries there. If you want to add something for yourself, that's fine. And then you'll just select push upload there. And your document will go into the file. Next step, very important. How do we know that something went in your file, and how are you going to keep track of what you need to submit? So, as I said, we're going to talk about files and tasks. So you're going to click on the task, and these are all the tasks that you need to do to submit your application. Again, this mirrors what you have here. So if I come to these general documents, there's not a lot in this application work center, frankly. There's just, let's see, there is the authorization and acceptance form that goes here. So when I've uploaded that into that one file folder where all the uploads go, I'm just going to click here, upload general documents. Now you will be able to track what you've submitted, and we'll be able to see that you've submitted it as well. Any questions on that so far? If you've been in our work centers before, I think this is a very familiar space. Now, one thing I want to point out here with this application submission, you'll see here, complete the application task section of the partner portal. All right, what is that? So let's take a look at the partner portal. And partner portal looks like this. So this is the name of my organization. This is where all these documents are going to go that you don't have to do it 10 different times for 10 different projects. Again, if there's anything in here that you need to, that we're providing the form that you need to download, just go in there. Why does it do that? Maybe yours won't do that. Anyway, here are your forms here to download. Again, you can verify it here, where you can find these things. So the partner portal, organizational documents, well, that's not one you need, but say one further down here, you'll get to some other areas you'll see on here, like MOUs with partners if you have, well, sorry. You don't have many. You're providing most of these, as you can see. Anyway, so again, go back to the task. Once you've uploaded that document, go back to the task and check it complete. This section here, what's unique about the partner portal, you do have some different files, so it will tell you where to upload the file. We hope it's intuitive. So your staff bios and resumes will be uploaded to the staff bios general contractor file. Let's see, articles of incorporation and bylaws that'll go in the organizational documents file. So just check that. Okay, once you upload all those, so we're notified. And then once you have done all of these, you're only doing, like, this section's for later, so don't worry about that. But once you've checked all of these that are for the application, then you will come over here and check this task that you have completed the application task section of the partner portal. So is that clear? A couple places you can check. Check the document checklist tab. The task itself should be helpful with information. You can even click on that again on that task, and it will kind of reiterate what's written in the document site and the document checklist, so you know what you should be uploading. Now, the last most important task here is, you've done this, you've done all your tasks, you're awesome. And then you get down to here, submit this. Only complete this step when the application is totally complete. This is your very last step. It is this timestamp that's really important for us to know that you are good to go and we need to come in here and look at your application. So that is your final step to submitting your application. So Jessica, I think we can go back to any questions while I'm in here, and then I'll just go back to the final, it's kind of a final wrap up of our steps here. And I can't see the questions, Jessica, so if anybody's there, let me know.
No questions in the chat so far,
Okay.
but someone's welcome to raise their hand if they have any questions, or drop them in the chat now.
All right. Then if that's the case, why don't, I'll just stop sharing here and you can take me back to the slideshow.
Oh, I need to take you back to the slideshow. 1 second.
Lead me, Jessica. All right. So again, refer to that document checklist. They're both set up very much the same way. We're just going to be checking out files. That's where you're going to go find your things and submit them. And Jessica, can you go to the next slide, please? And then, of course, in both, you'll have these tasks to complete. So make sure you check the task just by clicking on that button to let us know that you've submitted the document, and that timestamp is really important. So that's it for my review of the work centers. We'll give it a few minutes or a few seconds for any more questions, and then we can just carry on.
I don't see any Procorum related questions. So
And, and there may be some opportunities where maybe it's getting too much into the weeds now, that, depending on your organizational structure and how you're designing your project development, some of these things we might want to put in your application work center. But just go ahead and follow the system that we've given you thus far. And if we need to make any tweaks, we'll definitely do that, just so we know where to find everything and you know where to find everything too.
Yeah. And just to reiterate that this whole partner portal thing is a little bit of a pilot program. It's an idea that we thought was a good idea to kind of save everyone time. But if it turns out to be super difficult and confusing and ends up taking more time than what you would have done if you just had one work center and doesn't really save anyone any time. Um, we can go back to the way it was in the past. So please, we would appreciate you following this process and then telling us later how this process went for you. And please be honest, because it is just a pilot program. And then one additional detail about Procorum that we don't have a slide on because it's kind of a new thing, or like just something new that I wanted to bring to everyone's attention. The NOFA kind of goes into some details on the different charges. One of those charges is an application charge that is required prior to submitting your application. We are going to invoice you for those, or we'll put an invoice in your Procorum Work Center so that you're able to pay those online. If you don't submit your application, then those invoices will be canceled, so they're not due unless you submit your application. If you are looking for those immediately, they are not in your work center yet. We have to get those tailored individually for every different organization that applies, and we've run into a small hiccup, so we're not going to have those ready within that 5 business days that we said we'll have everything for you. But it's okay because that's not something that's going to take a long time to handle. So if you already have your work centers, just keep an eye out. Those will be coming hopefully soon. But that was a little into the weeds, that since we're talking about Procorum, I wanted to bring that up. And I will go ahead and move us on to the next topic. So thank you so much, Susie, for that super helpful run through. I am glad I didn't have to do the Procorum run through. So I really appreciate your help. So I'm going to bring us back around to the application process. We talked about the pre-development tasks, the pre-application, and the partner portal and application work center. We'll talk more about the application in our training later this week. So now that puts us at the preliminary review. Once you've submitted your application and documents, it will go through a few steps here at OHCS. The first is the preliminary review. This is going to essentially check all of those pass-fail criteria, which are listed in the NOFA document and on this slide. We'll make sure your application is completed and all your documents are signed. We'll make sure that you meet your eligibility criteria. We'll check our required timeliness tasks like your development schedule, your site control, and your zoning. And then we'll make sure your pro forma meets minimum requirements. I'll go over those more in the pro forma training next week. If you're only applying for OEHTC and not LIFT, this will be where your review ends. If you're applying for LIFT, your project will then move on to threshold review scoring. This is another item I'll go into more detail during the application and scoring workshop, but I did want to share a little bit of information on it today. So the threshold review will be based on 6 different categories. Development capacity will look at the work that you've done and the work that you're currently doing to ensure that you have the capacity for the project that you're applying for. Development experience will make sure that you've put together a development team that knows how to do the project. We'll review your efforts to reach out to, include, and serve communities and communities underserved in housing. We'll review financial viability and risk mitigation. Project details is where you can tell us all the cool things about your project, and then stewardship will look at your work in the shared equity model that you use or that you'll use for your project. You'll need to reach a minimum score in each of those categories. We've posted what we hope is a clear and helpful rubric for how we'll score your application. You'll also be asked to score yourself, both to help you make sure your application will meet our requirements and to help us identify any issues or misunderstandings where we might score you low, but you scored yourself high. The minimum required scores will also vary based on your application type. We talked about RESCs, or the rural, emerging, small, and culturally specific applicants. If you meet one of those special eligibility criteria, then your minimum requirements will be slightly lower than the requirements for other applicants. We'll also be completing a portfolio risk review, which will impact your financial viability and risk mitigation minimum requirements. But again, that's something we'll go more into detail with in the next training session. Finally, I want to flag that because this application is not competitive, you should look at each point as an opportunity to reach that minimum score. We don't expect you to earn every single point available on this application. In fact, we actually tried to build it with multiple paths in mind. For example, if you're an experienced organization with a lot of development experience and well-qualified staff, we're not going to deny your application if you don't have development partnerships. Vice versa, if your organization doesn't have a lot of experience, but your staff do, and you've made strong partnerships, we're not going to deny your application just because your organization is new. Once you get through scoring, your application will go into the queue for recommendations for awards. Since this is a first-come, first-served application, we will award the first applicants who meet minimum threshold first until we run out of funds. But how do we determine who's first in line? So we've put together a little formula here. Your position in line will be based on your final submission date, which will be determined by taking your initial submission date, which is that date that you clicked the submit button in Procorum that Susie showed you. And adding the number of business days that it took for you to submit any missing documents or resolve any issues with scoring. This is to prevent people from submitting incomplete applications just to get that early first date. So I have a couple of examples here to show you what that means. This first applicant submits their application on March 1st. When we complete their preliminary review, we notice that one document is missing, so we reach out on April 14th, and the next day the applicant provides the missing document. They move on to threshold scoring and pass everything with flying colors, so their final submission date would be March 1st plus that one extra day, so we'd consider their final submission date to be March 2nd. Now let's look at the second example. This applicant is ready to apply and submits their application the second we begin accepting them on February 24th. We complete the preliminary review and identify a few missing documents. The applicant responds that same day and provides the missing documents. Now, I want to flag here for a second how we're going to calculate days. And I want to make it clear that if there is a missing document that we have to reach out to you for, there is no way to get 0 days added to your submission. Even if you respond within 5 minutes of our email, we will still add 1 day because this is a day later than your initial submission. So essentially, if you respond the same day or the next day, you'll get 1 day added to your submission date. And then after that, it will continue to go up by 1 each business day. Sorry, excuse me. So back to this example, they move on to threshold scoring and we identify some concerns. Maybe their narratives don't really give us enough information, or they have some glaring pro forma issues. We reach out to get those resolved, and it takes about a week for the applicant to get things done. From the dates here, you can see there's actually 6 days between us reaching out and their submission, but because we're only counting business days, we only consider this to be 5 days. I also want to point out that April 27th is a Sunday, since we're only counting business days again. Anything submitted on the weekend will be considered submitted the following Monday. So this applicant's initial submission date was February 24th. Then we add 1 day for the preliminary review and 5 days for the threshold review, making their final submission date March 2nd. And I think this is a good spot to mention that this is not a competitive NOFA in the sense that we're comparing your scores, but it still may be competitive in the sense that we're not going to have enough funds to support every project that applies. Your final submission date is going to matter in this application. So I urge you to thoroughly review your application and make sure that it's complete. And I urge you to be thoughtful about your self-scoring to make sure that we won't need to follow up with you to resolve any issues. If you use these two applicants as an example, the second applicant submitted their application a whole week before the first one, but because this applicant hadn't been thorough, their final application date ended up being the same. And then speaking of the same, what happens if we're running out of funding and the next two applicants have the same submission date? We would consider that a tie, and our tie-breaking rule is that we will prioritize applications with a greater geographic distribution of affordable housing. If that doesn't work, like if both applications are in Portland, then we'll prioritize the one that provides the greater number of affordable housing units. I feel like I've covered a lot of technical things, and I'm about to dive into another technical thing, so I'll pause again to see if there are any questions that I need to talk to or respond to about the scoring criteria and determination of first come, first served.
Well, Talia definitely has it handled responding in the chat. So if there are any questions that haven't been addressed, if you'd like to speak up, that'd be fine.
Yeah, feel free to raise your hand or come off mute. And for anyone listening to the recording, I will probably take all of those questions that Talia is answering from the chat and put them in the FAQ document, just so that they're accessible to people who aren't here currently.
And there's a question in the chat about dates for applications. There are 2 dates, February 24th, when OHCS will begin accepting full applications, and then the March 10th deadline for first round of applications. Do you want to just describe that a little more?
So I'm going to dive more into the cohorts next. That's the next technical thing that I'm going to get into. But yes, there are the 3 big dates, which is February 24th is when we'll accept applications. March 10th is when we will have a deadline for the first cohort, which I'll get into the cohorts soon. And then the final deadline is May 12th. And that's when the application will close.
If Pooja, if you'd like to come off mute, and I see your hand is up.
Yeah, it was a little confusing to us because we didn't understand why that March 10th deadline was there, because if you don't make the first cohort, wouldn't you automatically like fold into the second one? Or would you have to reapply for the second one? If you are, so it was confusing because we were gearing towards submitting on the 24th, and then we saw the March 10th deadline and we were like, oh, okay, so we have 10 more days to submit. But it seems like it is still 24th that we should aim for, not 10th.
Yeah, so the 24th is the day that we'll start accepting applications. So technically, you can click that submit button in Procorum at any time. But if you submit before February 24th, we'll just round that up to February 24th. So that is the earliest initial submission date that we can accept is the 24th. We will continue to accept applications until that March 10th deadline. So it's mainly just to leave things open for people to submit. It's likely most people or a lot of people will submit on the 24th because of the first come, first serve deadline. But March 10th is just kind of the cutoff between the first and second cohort. So you don't have to reapply. Like if you submit prior to March 10th and you don't get an award, you don't need to reapply for the second cohort. It's just kind of like as we consider the two cohorts a little bit differently, which again, I'll get into in the next section of the application, that March 10th is just kind of the divider. Any applications we receive before March 10th will go to the cohort 1. Any applications we receive after March 10th will go to that cohort 2. And part of that so that we can meet all of our internal deadlines too. And I saw Joe's hand up too. Did your question get answered, Joe?
No, I assumed you'd answer it in the next part. It's about cohorts, but I might as well. So we do have a large project that is, and you mentioned earlier that you encourage applying in separate phases. So my question is basically, by default, I assume that one phase would be considered under the first cohort, and then the next phase would be considered under the next cohort, even if we put in the applications simultaneously.
I actually want to reach out to you separately about that, Joe. So let's put that on hold, and because I did see your pre-application, and I want to talk through how we can better handle that for you.
Okay, great. Well, I look forward to having that call. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. All right. Are there any other questions in the chat that I need to answer, or are we good to move forward?
I think we're good to move forward.
Okay. All right. Well, then now let's go ahead and get into the cohort things that I keep promising I'm going to talk about. So we've gone over the basics of the final submission date, and this is just a whole extra layer to the determination of who gets an award. So if you remember our timeline for this NOFA, we did split the application submission into 2 cohorts, one that we'll recommend in May and one that we'll recommend a couple of months later. We're going to approach these cohorts differently as we award funds. We recognize that we're not going to have funding for every project we receive an application for, but we do want to use the funds to make a diverse impact and to support projects from multiple partners across the state. So our first cohort has some additional limitations on it to help us do that. We're going to ask all applicants to rank their applications by priority. If you're only submitting one application, of course, that'll be priority 1. But for those submitting multiple applications, you'll need to rank each one separately as priority 1, 2, 3, etc. We're going to review and award all first priority applications first, before moving on to second priority applications, then third, then fourth, etc. If there is still funding available after cohort 1, cohort 2 will not have any prioritization, and all applicants in cohort 2 will be awarded based on the final submission date and their set-aside category. After this cohort, set-asides will be released and go back to any unawarded applicants based solely on final submission date. And I do have another example for you that hopefully makes it a little easier to understand how it all works. So in this example, we've received all of our applications for the first cohort. We've scored them all, and we've determined their final submission dates. And this is how those applications line up in each of their different set-asides. So consider each person a separate application, and then each color's a separate organization. And they've been lined up by submission date. So the first submission first and the last submission last. So if you look at set aside 1, we have 6 applications. 2 of them are from the same organization. Skip down to the all other applications, and we have 8 applications, including 2 from organization blue and 3 from organization red. Then in the middle, set aside 2, we actually have a 3rd application from organization blue and another unique application. The numbers represent the priority that the applicant gave. So the first thing we're going to do is pick out those 2nd and 3rd priority applications and move them to the end of the line because we're evaluating all 1st, then all 2nd, then all 3rd. So the new order will look like this. And then let's pretend that in this perfect world where numbers are even and everything makes sense, we can fund exactly 5 projects in each category. Of course, that's not how the actual set-asides will work, but it does make this example easier. So you can see in this example that we've awarded all of set-aside 1 and all of the more general set-aside available to everyone, but we've still got a few spots in set-aside 2. And just a couple of things to point out. First, you may also notice that Organization Blue received funding for 2 projects, but it was their 1st and 3rd priority, so not their 2nd. And that's just because of the way that the set-asides worked out. Second is that there are 4 unawarded applications, but still some funds left over in the 2nd set-aside. So what we'll do is we'll take everyone who's left and arrange them by order of final submission date, and then we'll hold them in the queue. So here's what that looks like. Those 4 applicants will need to wait until after cohort 2 to learn if they receive funding or not. So they're not denied, they're just being held for now. So we receive our applications for cohort 2. We receive 1 in that set aside 2 category, and then for some reason someone applies in the general category. Maybe they thought they were in the set aside but weren't, or maybe they just wanted to try their luck. Either way, they didn't get awarded because there's room in set aside 2. The applicant in that set aside receives funds. So that means that in this perfect example where we fund exactly 5 people in each category, there's still space for 2 more awards. And we're going to fill those spaces using the queue of applicants by submission date. So first we'll go back and we'll award this 2nd application from Organization Blue right here. And then we're going to fill those, and then it would make sense to award application green next. But maybe the green and red applications have the same final submission date. And in this case, we would use the tie-breaking rule here. And so what's next? After we've scored everyone, determined final submission date, and determined who gets awards, we'll move on to recommendations. So after our internal process, we'll present our recommendations to the Housing Stability Council for final approval. After that, typically within just a couple of weeks, we'll email you with a notice that you will be receiving an award, and then we'll send you the reservation letter. The reservation letter officially kicks off your award and the rest of the process. So keep your reservation letter date in mind because we are going to use that for all of your timeliness deadlines. This slide shows those requirements. So you'll need to reach financial closing with LIFT and any construction lenders within 6 months of the award. We'll want to see vertical construction started within 12 months and then certificates of occupancy for all units within 36 months of that reservation letter. We do allow another 6 months wiggle room to get all of those homes sold. And that is actually really it for the NOFA process. I did get really technical and into the weeds, but I did want to share all of those specifics with you. And now's a good time to pause again to see if there's any questions about the cohorts, the award process, timeline, or really, I guess, any other questions that didn't get answered in the chat that I should be answering.
Joe, go ahead. You have and unmute.
Yeah, is the home sales within 42 months, is that new or has that always been the policy?
We added this last year. So it's not new, but it's not forever. The 36 months has always been deadline for the homes to be constructed and ready for sale. And we did add this kind of little bit of wiggle room to get the sale completed.
Okay, cool.
Here's a question in the chat. Jessica says, how long will the application review be then once awarded? And follow up to that, how soon are funds available for distribution?
So we're hopeful that our application review for the first cohort would only take a couple of months, and then we would be recommending it to Housing Stability Council by May. Maybe if we get way too many applications that we can't handle, they'll go in June instead of May. And then the second cohort would go to Housing Stability Council probably 2 months after that. And then you should receive your reservation letters the same month. And that is when those funds are committed to you, essentially. So we're holding those funds for you until we actually close on the loan. And then once I mean, I think we are probably ready for closing, probably within a month or two. 6 months is our deadline there, but how long that takes is really up to you and how quickly you finish all of your underwriting tasks. And Susie, you can correct me if I'm wrong about that.
Nope, that's right. And then once you have closed on the LIFT loan, that escrow is closed, then funds will be available.
And you can draw once a month, just to save us from processing too many draws at a time.
And there is another question here. Is there an opportunity to meet one-on-one to ask specific questions relating to their projects?
Yes, I actually have one more slide a little later to talk about what kind of technical assistance we can provide. That's just kind of part of my closeout. But yes, absolutely. If you have specific questions or project-specific questions, I'm happy to meet one-on-one to talk about it.
And at this point, there are no unanswered questions in the chat.
Great. All right, then I will move to the closeout section. Okay. So as I mentioned, the technical assistance slide. So because this is a non-competitive NOFA, we are able to provide a lot more support than we have in the past. So the first style of support that we can provide is these official trainings. So thumbs up for already taking that first step. The second style of support that we can provide is one-on-one assistance. We're really happy and excited to be able to help you with the process and putting together strong applications. I've included some examples of things we can and can't help you with on this slide. So we can help you determine if these funding sources will work for your project and if you meet minimum eligibility requirements. We can clarify questions in the application if you don't understand, or help you handle a weird situation that you aren't quite sure how to make work, like adding a deferred developer fee to your pro forma. We can't provide general support on becoming a developer or a CLT because we don't really have that experience. We'll just point you towards the experts in those situations. We can't make recommendations for other organizations because we have to kind of maintain that neutral stance, and the state can't support a single organization. We also can't help you fill out your applications to get your best awards. And we can't pre-review your application because we're not going to have the capacity to review your application twice. So we'll review after you submit. One thing that I don't mention in the slide is our interview process. So this is something that I'll go over more in that application and scoring training, but we can make some level of adjustments to your final score based on an interview or feedback. So one thing that you can also do in advance of submitting your application is to reach out about any gaps that you've identified in your application. I think the most likely example of this is going to be in the development experience and capacity sections. So if you're self-scoring and you find that you don't meet the minimum requirements, please feel free to reach out to me and we can talk through that. Our interview process will identify what we consider gaps and then allow you to explain how you're filling those gaps in a way that's not captured in the application. So if you've already identified gaps, go ahead and reach out to me before submitting your application and we can do that interview process early. And then the last feedback that we can provide is from us reaching out at different points in the application. We talked about this a little bit during the final submission date conversation, but it was mostly using the example of missing documents. But at all of these points, we're able to reach out to you to make fixes or changes to your application or resolve issues. Our goal is not to deny any application that doesn't meet these minimum requirements, so we are happy to talk through any issues we find and give you an opportunity to resolve them. And then our final touch point will be if we're recommending you to Housing Stability Council, we may reach out to you for some additional information to move you through that process. Please direct your initial emails to our ho.development email address. Those will reach me, but it does help me to keep everything organized and make sure none of your emails slip through the cracks. And I did want to share just a few additional resources here. You've probably already been to our NOFA website, but all of our NOFA related postings, application, announcement, trainings, and everything will be posted there. We've also updated our LIFT manual for this year, and it's available on our website as well. If you're applying for OEHTC, I've included the link to the OEHTC manual. And then we have our next 2 training sessions later this week and next week. So the application and scoring workshop is going to be on Thursday. And then the Proforma training is going to be next week. And that's actually everything that I wanted to share with you. If there aren't any other questions, and since we do have a little bit of time left, I wanted to open the floor to allow for some discussion amongst yourselves. Moving to online only meetings has been great for efficiency and helping us reach everyone in the state without making anyone drive to Salem or Portland, but you do sort of miss those networking opportunities. So in an attempt to kind of fill that gap, I thought I would ask these questions to sort of spur a conversation. So is there any experience, or if there are any experienced LIFT applicants in the room, do you have any advice or tips and tricks for new applicants? And then to any new applicants, do you have any questions for the more experienced LIFT applicants? And then also I'm still here to answer any general presentation related questions as well. But yeah, I just wanted to open the floor and see if anyone wanted to have a conversation with each other. It sounds like the answer is no. And that's okay if this doesn't work out. All right. Well, I'm not going to make everybody sit in an awkward silence for half an hour. So if nobody wants to answer all these questions or either of these questions or have any sort of conversation, then I am happy to reach the end of the presentation and give everyone 30 minutes of their time back. So um, we appreciate you all joining us today. We're so excited that so many people are interested in the NOFA this year, and we're looking forward to learn more about your organizations and your projects and see what comes in.
Thank you.
Oh, go ahead, Derek. Sorry.
Hi, how you doing? Think you guys did a great job. I had a question about the cohorts and phases of a project. So if like you had phase one and phase two of a project, would say phase one be priority one and then phase two would be priority two, and they're considered one project, or are they considered two different projects? Just if that makes sense what I'm asking.
It does make sense what you're asking. And I think I might also ask that this question go offline. So maybe if you can send me an email so I have your contact information and can get back to you soon. I think we had planned on second phases being submitted in a later funding year. So like next year, not coming with the same application phase this year. So I want to actually make a solid determination so that we're answering everyone's questions the same and we don't accidentally allow one person to submit two phases and not a second person. So I just want to make sure we have processes clear, and then I can get back to you with an answer.
Okay, great. Thank you guys. You guys did a great job.
Thank you. And we appreciate you joining and your thoughtful questions. And I'm going to go ahead and end this meeting. So everyone who's left, thank you so much for joining us. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions.